Hello and welcome to the class of World History. Today we are going to talk about the reforms which were introduced by Napoleon. By 1799, it was very clear for France that the only institute which was actually keeping France together was its army. There were coalitions of countries which were formed to defeat the French Revolution and its goal in France, but it was army which was fighting the battle and it was safeguarding the border of the France. And in that army, one man, Napoleon Bonaparte, became very successful. In 1796, he fought against Austria and Sardinia where he was successful. Then he went to Egypt and he launched an expedition, though he was not successful in Egypt, but when he came back home, he was welcomed as hero. In 1799, he took the office of the first consulate or dictator in France, and he became the real or the true absolute monarch of France from 1799. However, Napoleon's era is very important for France because the reforms that he introduced were true to the goal of French Revolution, and also he brought France out of the chaotic stage where France was not able to establish a single stable government. So, what we are going to study today? We are studying the Napoleonic era in France. So, when we talk about Napoleonic era in France, remember in 1799, Napoleon took the title of first consul or dictator. So, the government that he formed, it looked like a representative government of people, but it was basically Napoleon and his team who were making all the decision. He took the title of first consul and literally every administrative decision was taken by first consul. Later on, after forming first consul, he also defeated two coalition of countries against France, and he became more popular among the people of France, and later on in 1804 he took the title of emperor. By 1804, Napoleon understood he had become successful enough to call himself an emperor, and the first empire, this is known as the first empire of France. Now, let's talk about the reformations that Napoleon brought in France. So, when we talk about the reformation, the first administrative reform that Napoleon brought was, of course, codifying the law. Remember, France was under a chaotic state, and before revolution it was divided into three estates. The laws were not similar for all the citizens. However, even after revolution, France was not out of chaos, because during reign of terror, when Robespierre was ruling the government, he placed many people in jail, and not only that, he guillotined people without giving a proper explanation for such punishment. Later on, Robespierre himself was beheaded by his own supporter, who got fed up by the reign of terror or the violence that Robespierre had introduced in the society. So, what France needed was a stable government which would rule the state according to law, and this is what Napoleon did. After coming into power, the first thing he did was to codify the law. He established uniform civil code. Now, the word uniform civil code is very popular in India as well, because there is lot of debate going on regarding uniform civil code. What is it? similar law for all the citizens of a country. Now, this is so important because by establishing uniform civil law, he was able to introduce a stable society, a justiciable society which provide equal law and equal justice to the people of the society. The next important reform that Napoleon introduced was religious tolerance. Now, here you have to remember that Napoleon's era was an era where not only religious freedom was given, but religious tolerance was also propagated. He recognized Protestants and Jewish citizens of France, but also he signed a contract with Pope, and the rift that had been created between Pope and France was ended finally by Napoleon through his covenant with the Pope. So, this was a very important change in the religious life of France, though religion was given recognition, but at the same time he propagated and practiced tolerance to all the religion and freedom of religion. Now, next important fact that you must remember, though he practiced religious freedom, he censored speech and press in France. The next important reform that he introduced was nationalization of education. Education is perhaps the building block of a nation. A child is motivated towards nation building through education, and Napoleon had a very good idea of it. He established many national universities and schools where the curriculum was also decided by the government, what kind of curriculum was to be given to the student. The education was created in a manner so that it will imbibe nationalism among the people. So, he nationalized education, and it was the first of its kind of experiment which was made by Napoleon, and it helped in further revolutions that came in France, and when finally France became a democracy after Napoleon's era. So, nationalization of education was a very important reform. Next, he established the Bank of France. Now, Bank of France was a very important institution because it somehow created a stability of finance. Paper currency was introduced along with a good gold reserve to stabilize the economy. It offered loan to the traders and merchants, and this was a very important financial step that Napoleon had took. Along with the Bank of France, he had also started giving government job to the people on the bank on the basis of merit. So, merit was made an important criteria for government job. This is a very, very important point. If you remember, before revolution, the government jobs were basically monopolized by the nobles, and that was one of the reasons why the revolution took place. And as I told you, in the reforms of Napoleon, you will see the goal and motive of the revolution was championed. Napoleon became the champion of French Revolution, and this very fact that merit was now the base of all the government job gave immense opportunity to the people from middle class who had knowledge and education to become part of the administration. Next important reform that he brought was end of feudalism and serfdom. Now, Napoleon not only ended feudalism in France, but wherever he went, whether it was Spain or Italy, he ended feudalism and serfdom there as well, which resulted in the growth of a modern society, the growth of industrialization. His whole idea of, distributing the land among peasants and ending the feudal system actually was the harbinger of the modern society in Europe. The final important reform that Napoleon had introduced was the growth of nationalism. Now, nationalism not only grew in France during Napoleon's era, but wherever he went, nationalism developed. Why? Because people understood that they had to safeguard their border against Napoleon's invasion, and that was the basic reason why nationalism developed in those countries as well. Right after Napoleonic War, we see the unification of Germany and Italy, and somewhere Napoleon's invasion was a very major major reason for the growth of nationalism in Europe. So, this were the basic reforms that Napoleon had introduced in Europe. However, the downfall of Napoleon was also because of these reforms itself. The fact that he kept on invading new state made new enemies for the Napoleon, and finally he introduced the Continental system, in which the trade of England was carved, or there was ban on the trade of England. What did he do in this Continental system? Let's talk about Continental system. During Napoleon's reign, he knew that finance was going to be a very important source for the growth of France, and he wanted to conquer more and more market. But obviously, Britain was already marching ahead in imperialism. It had colonies and it was selling its product in the new market of its colonies, and France had to somehow compete with Britain. This was the time when Napoleon introduced Continental system, in which all the states which were defeated by France were asked not to buy any item from Britain. Also, they were stopped from giving port to the British ship. This is known as Continental system. Initially, few countries abided with France, but obviously even European countries were buying stuff from Britain, and they could not have agreed to Napoleon's idea of how he would try to enhance his market in the world. This was one of the reasons why Napoleon saw a downfall. Not only that, Napoleon's naval strength was not equivalent to his military strength. Though in land he was very powerful, but his naval strength was not at par with the power of Britain, which was evident in the war that he fought against Britain in Egypt as well, where he was defeated in the Battle of Nile by Nelson, and later on in the Battle of Waterloo also we see that it was the the weak naval power which finally led to the downfall of Napoleon. After this, in 1871, we will see that France will go on, after Napoleon, obviously the monarchies of Europe will reinstate the old monarch of the France in throne. But later on in 1871, France will see a series of revolution, and finally France will become the second nation after Britain to attain democracy. So this was all about Napoleon and the condition of France during his era. In another class, we will meet you with another topic of world history.